It all began at a party soaked in gold and ego, the kind of night where billionaires drink champagne like water and whisper absurd bets just for fun. Nathan Grant stood at the center, a man who never lost, always 2 steps ahead in life and business. When Damien, a longtime friend with a twisted sense of humor, threw $1 million challenge at him, Nathan didn't blink. Marry a woman who didn't fit his usual mold. No glam, no fame, no allure, and stay married for 6 months. For Nathan, it was just another trophy waiting to be claimed, another emotional story to add to his collection of victories.
Hello, I'm going to tell you this incredible story. Put on your headphones for a better experience and sit comfortably because you're going to be moved. Remember that to receive new stories like this, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell. Without further ado, let's get to the rest of the story.
People like Nathan often believe they can buy anything: loyalty, attention, even love. But what he didn't expect was Alina Morris. Strong-willed, unapologetically herself, and completely uninterested in being impressed. She wasn't like the models that floated through his life like expensive smoke. From the moment she walked in, chin high and eyes sharp, Nathan sensed something unfamiliar, unpredictability, and deep down, something in him shivered. A real story was about to unfold. Alina didn't play the role he imagined for her. She didn't fawn over his designer suits or his custom car collection. She knew about the bet, and instead of being offended or crushed, she leaned in with quiet fire. "Let's make this interesting," she'd said with a half smile, as if daring him to try and win something that wasn't his to control. Nathan was intrigued, but also uneasy. It was a dance of power, and she wasn't missing a step. The marriage began not with affection, but with friction. Nathan expected resistance, but not strategy. Alina kept her distance, emotionally and physically, refusing to let him define the rules of the game. And for a man obsessed with control, that was maddening. Their home became a quiet battlefield, charged with unspoken tension and glances that lingered a second too long. This wasn't some silly game anymore. It was starting to feel like one of those touching stories that leave a mark. He tried all the tricks: lavish gifts, exclusive dinners, a weekend on his private island. Nothing moved her. If anything, her indifference was the most seductive thing he'd ever encountered. She didn't argue. She simply didn't react. That silence was louder than any scream, and Nathan found himself thinking about her more than he ever expected. For the first time, the chase wasn't about conquest. It was about understanding, and understanding felt dangerous. Behind his confident smirk, cracks began to form. He told himself it was still about the bet, still about Damien. But deep down, something was shifting. There was no script to follow with Alina. Every moment felt raw, unrehearsed. As weeks passed, Nathan noticed himself doing things he never would have done before, like waiting by the kitchen just to hear her laugh at a podcast. Could a real story actually start from something so shallow? What Nathan didn't know, and Alina wasn't ready to reveal, was that this game had more layers than he imagined. While he saw a woman out of his league in terms of resistance, she saw a man who'd once shattered her world without even knowing it. But we'll get to that. For now, Nathan still believed he had the upper hand, unaware that the real game hadn't even started yet. From the beginning, Alina drew her lines in the sand, sharp, non-negotiable, and unapologetically clear. She wasn't rude, she was rooted. Nathan, who was used to women orbiting around his lifestyle, found himself orbiting around her silence. She turned down designer clothes with a smile, skipped his parties without excuse, and shut down his charm like flipping a switch. It wasn't pride, it was peace, and she refused to trade it for anything. Nathan had never felt so invisible. For a man who moved the world with a phone call, Alina's stillness was unnerving. She had this calm defiance, like someone who'd survived worse than heartbreak and wasn't afraid to walk alone. Every attempt he made to impress her bounced back like a rubber bullet. And the more she stood her ground, the more he found himself disarmed, emotionally naked in a way he couldn't explain. This was no longer a game. It was an emotional story in motion. She didn't talk much about herself, but when she did, it wasn't to entertain, it was to teach. She told Nathan about the value of time, the freedom of saying no, and how people often confuse power with presence. He'd laugh nervously, pretending not to be rattled, but her words stuck. Like pebbles in his expensive shoes, they followed him everywhere. And somewhere between their quiet dinners and wordless mornings, he began to see that her silence wasn't cold. It was healing. It's strange how some people break you without ever raising their voice. Alina did that. She broke his arrogance. When he offered a luxury weekend in Paris, she asked for a night on the balcony with wine and music instead. She didn't want more. She wanted less. Less noise, less performance, less pretending. And that, to Nathan, felt more intimate than anything he'd ever known. There was a morning when he left his phone on the table for 3 hours. Unthinkable for someone like him. He was watching her paint her nails, completely focused, headphones in, smiling at something only she could hear. It wasn't romantic. It was grounding. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan didn't want to escape into deals and data. He wanted to stay in that quiet room, with that quiet woman, living a moment that felt quietly perfect. Alina never attacked Nathan's wealth, but she never let it define him either. "You're not your money," she once said without even looking up. And it pierced him like nothing else. She was rebuilding him, not through affection, but through boundaries. She forced him to ask questions he never dared to face. Questions that would soon pull him into the core of her real story and his own regrets. Because behind all her calm, there was a storm brewing. One that Nathan had unknowingly started years ago. And while he believed he was getting closer to her, Alina was about to reveal something that would burn through the illusion like fire through silk. It happened on a rainy afternoon, one of those quiet, heavy days where time seems to slow down just enough for the truth to slip through. Alina stood by the window, fingers gripping a cup of tea, gaze lost in the gray outside. "Do you remember a company called Morris & Son?" she asked, voice like a razor wrapped in velvet. Nathan blinked. The name rang no bells, but something in her tone felt final. A real story was about to surface, and it would sting. She didn't flinch as she told him. That company was her father's. A small, honest family business that had lasted 2 generations until it didn't. "Your firm bought it, gutted it, sold the pieces, and left us with nothing," she said. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. Not because he remembered the deal, it was one of hundreds, but because her eyes didn't carry hatred. They carried grief. And grief has a way of making touching stories feel more like confessions than accusations. Alina didn't cry. She never did. But every word she spoke felt like it had been sharpened on the inside. Her father, unable to recover from the loss, had taken his own life just 6 months later. That was the silence she lived with every day. And now, she was offering it to Nathan, not to destroy him, but to make him understand. This marriage? It wasn't revenge. It was confrontation, a chance to put a face on the faceless cruelty she'd endured. The irony? He had chosen her, randomly, out of ego, out of thrill, out of a reckless $1,000,000 dare. And yet, she had accepted, deliberately, painfully, with a purpose she never planned to reveal. Until now, the emotional story she was crafting wasn't about winning a bet. It was about reclaiming her voice. She wanted him to feel what it's like to be powerless in a world that only responds to power. For the first time in his life, Nathan had no words, no excuse, no spin, just a gut-deep nausea that came from realizing he'd been the villain in someone else's life without even knowing it. And worse, that he might have kept doing it blindly for the rest of his life. He looked at Alina, really looked at her, and saw not a woman playing hard to get, but a survivor of something he helped create. Alina didn't need his apology. She needed him to change, to see the cost of his choices, to carry, even if for a little while, the weight she'd borne alone. And Nathan? He didn't defend himself. Not this time. Instead, he walked out of the room, not in anger, but in shame. That's how real stories begin to shift. When silence falls not because there's nothing to say, but because there's finally too much. Still, something inside him was stirring. Something new and terrifying and completely unfamiliar. Guilt. Guilt can be a seed if it's watered with action. And Nathan was about to find out what it meant to rebuild not just trust, but himself. Guilt doesn't scream, it whispers. And for Nathan, it whispered at night, in quiet rooms, in empty glances toward Alina when she wasn't looking. He began noticing things he never did before. How she liked her tea just shy of boiling. How she always wore socks to sleep. How she paused before replying to emotional questions. These small details became his compass. It wasn't about pleasing her. It was about finally paying attention. Real attention. The kind that heals emotional story wounds. He didn't apologize with flowers or gifts. He apologized with action. One morning, Alina found her favorite daisies, wild, imperfect, free, on the counter, not delivered in a box, but handpicked. He started making her coffee the way she made it for herself. No questions, no declarations. Just quiet consistency. The same man who once used grand gestures to manipulate now used small gestures to rebuild. This wasn't about seduction anymore. It was about presence. Nathan even began showing up for people he'd wronged. A former assistant he once berated got an unexpected call and a heartfelt message. An old vendor he ghosted mid-contract received compensation and a letter of regret. These weren't PR stunts. No cameras. No posts. Just raw, awkward, necessary repairs. He wasn't trying to look like a better man. He was trying to become one. And even though Alina said little, she noticed. She always noticed. Sometimes growth doesn't come with applause. It comes with discomfort. Nathan found himself sitting with feelings he had long avoided. Guilt, fear, vulnerability. He stopped trying to dominate the space and started learning how to share it. At night, they would sit on opposite ends of the couch, watching old films in silence. Yet somehow, those silences felt full, like maybe the walls between them weren't as high as before. Alina remained cautious, but her gaze softened. She no longer looked at him like a threat, but like a man who was learning. One evening, as they walked back from a bookstore, their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was real. And in a world full of fake, real is rare. That small touch spoke louder than any speech. A quiet moment in a quiet chapter of a touching story still being written. Nathan didn't try to erase the past. He couldn't. But he began planting new memories, one moment at a time. Washing the dishes while she painted. Reading books she recommended. Asking questions and actually listening to the answers. These weren't sacrifices. They were invitations. To step outside himself and into a space where ego had no place. A space that Alina had been protecting all along. He didn't know if she'd ever fully trust him again. But for once, that wasn't the point. This wasn't about winning. It was about becoming someone worthy of staying. And just as Nathan started to accept that real love can't be forced, something unexpected began to bloom in the silence between them. By the 5th month, their home didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt lived in, warmed by routines that never had to be spoken aloud. Nathan and Alina weren't clinging to illusions of love. They were discovering the weight and wonder of something deeper. Not passion driven by pride, but connection born of patience. Sometimes, the most touching stories begin when both people stop pretending. They started laughing more. Real laughs. The kind that sneak up on you mid-conversation and leave both of you breathless. Nathan didn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that. Maybe in childhood, before power became his addiction. Alina would roll her eyes at his lame jokes, but she'd laugh anyway. And every laugh felt like a door opening. Not wide, but just enough for hope to peek in. They had movie nights that turned into deep talks. Long walks that ended with spontaneous confessions. Nathan told her about his childhood, the pressure to succeed, the loneliness of being idolized but never truly known. Alina, in turn, shared memories of her father. His hands always stained with oil from the shop, his ridiculous singing in the mornings. They weren't healing each other's pasts, but they were holding space for them. And that meant something. One night, after a quiet dinner on the balcony, Nathan turned to her and said, "I don't want this to end. No charm, no performance, just raw honesty." Alina looked at him, long and searching, and for the first time didn't deflect. "Then don't let it," she whispered. That moment didn't feel like the climax of a real story. It felt like the beginning of a new one, a shared one. When the 6 months finally came to a close, there was no celebration, no dramatic confession, just a calm morning with pancakes and jazz playing low. Nathan got down on one knee, not for a show, but for her. Marry me. No contract, no conditions, just me. Alina didn't answer with words. She pulled him up and kissed him. Soft, steady, sure. That was all he needed. Later that year, surrounded by a few close friends, they remarried. Not as players in a bet, but as partners. Equals. Builders of a life not defined by status or pain, but by growth. Alina wore a simple dress, barefoot in the grass. Nathan cried, openly, freely. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was flawed, messy, beautifully human. The kind of emotional story you remember not because it's perfect, but because it's true. And as they stood together, hand in hand, Alina whispered something only he could hear. You're not who you were. To which he replied, neither are you. A new chapter had begun. And within her, another life was just beginning. Fragile, small, full of potential. A child born from pain, healing, and a real love that neither of them saw coming. So, what would you have done in Nathan's shoes? Could you truly fall in love with someone after a beginning built on lies and ego? Or do you believe Alina's hidden motive was justified by the pain she carried for so long? These emotional stories force us to question how we judge others and whether love can grow from the ashes of betrayal. Now I want to hear from you. Did this real story touch you in any way? Do you believe true love can rise from a reckless bet? Or that everyone deserves a second chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if you enjoy touching stories like this, filled with twists, truth, and transformation, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss the next emotional ride. See you in the next story.